Community Notes is this newish feature on X, formerly known as Twitter, which allows people to add context or corrections to other people's posts, tweets, like this one, for example. And it seems to work very well. It tends to show notes which are actually useful, which is in contrast to other things on Twitter. If you look at the original post on X, Twitter, and then look at the replies, often the replies will be very tribal. There'll be some people saying, this is ridiculous, it's all wrong, and other people saying, yes, this is fantastic. Whereas the community notes tend to be just much more helpful than that. And I thought that was interesting. So I've dug into it a bit to understand how are they finding and surfacing these notes that generally are quite helpful, and has not got any implications for dispute resolution. Turns out that it does. Let me briefly explain how it works. I spent a very enjoyable morning earlier this week digging into the kind of machine learning concepts that are behind it. I'll put some links along with this post if anyone else is interested in digging into the detail. But broadly speaking, you've got this matrix of notes and users. So each note can be rated by multiple users, and each user may have rated multiple notes. So each cell in your matrix is going to be that user's particular rating of that note, whether they said it was helpful or unhelpful or what have you. And then, so that gives you your some training data, right? You've got that set up already. And the training process uses a model which assigns a latent factor, some number to each user and to each note. And it starts off with largely random numbers, and then slowly through an iterative process improves the allocated factor to each user and each note, such that the system can then recreate the matrix just from those factors, approximately recreate the matrix just from those factors. That's a fairly standard machine learning mechanism for building, for example, a recommendation engine. So Netflix, when it's recommending which films you like, it's got a big matrix of users and films, and using that training data, it can then predict, given that a particular film has been rated in a certain way by some other users, it can predict how likely you are to like that film, right? But Twitter's not quite doing that. It's taking this a little step further. What it's doing is that they observe that in the training data, there are some groups of people that tend to disagree with each other, but agree with the other people in that group. So, for example, there's going to be some notes that your crazy woke people all think are terrible, and your crazy right-wing conspiracy people think are super useful, and vice versa. And the model doesn't have to know anything about wokeness or conspiracy theories. It just needs to observe that there are some groups of people that tend to agree within the group and disagree strongly with people that are in the other group. And so what X is using, it's using the standard kind of recommendation prediction machine learning model to predict whether a note is likely to be found helpful. If it turns out that someone who was not expected to find that note helpful actually does rate it as helpful, and in fact, indeed, you get whole groups of people, so people from both of those normally opposing groups, lots of those people all agree that a particular note is helpful, then it must be really helpful because it's persuading people who otherwise wouldn't agree with each other. And that's what X is then using to surface the tweets, which you and I see as regular users. They're the tweets that have been rated by people who normally would not agree on finding something useful. So that's how their system works. And how can you use that to resolve disputes? Well, you could, and this is, just a bit of a thought experiment, as lots of my videos are, but you could get some training data. You could get a whole load of evidence from the court system. You could get claims and defenses and replies and what have you, about which the outcome. So there's been a trial and a judge has said, yes, Alice should pay Bob £100,000 or whatever it is. So you can use that as your training data, and you ask people, your panel of competent people, to look at the evidence and say, what do they think the outcome would have been? You can compare that to the actual outcome, and that gives you your matrix of cases and users and how much they diverged from the actual outcome, right? And you would expect to find, as with community notes on Twitter, that you would get groups of people that tended to agree. So, for example, in cases involving builders and householders, you might find that if you've got people on your panel who are builders, they tend to be more favorable towards a builder, and perhaps if there are people on your panel that are surveyors, they may be more favorable towards the towards the householder. But it doesn't matter. You don't need, the system doesn't need to know anything about that. It just needs to observe that there are people that tend usually to disagree. And so that's your training data. Then you have a new case, right? Some new evidence, and you give it to your panel, and you observe that some of your panel make a certain assessments of it. They, somebody says this, Alice should pay Bob 50 grand. Someone else says Bob should pay Alice 100 grand or whatever it is. So you get a bit of testing data, and then you can then observe whether there's a particular outcome, a particular amount of money that one side should pay the other that is rated as more helpful or is more commonly picked by your panel amongst people that normally wouldn't agree. And if that happens, you can be probably quite confident that that judgment, that outcome is the most acceptable outcome. And I think probably should end up being the most similar to the outcome that if that case actually went in front of a judge, what the judge would say. So I think that's pretty interesting. There's a bit of a backlog growing in the British court system. There's other countries that have very large backlogs in their civil claims system. If you could have some system that allow people to very quickly get to a reasonable answer, maybe that's going to help some people. I think a big drawback of that is that it's really hard to explain what's going on under the hood. Most people are not going to spend half a day reading up about machine learning to see what's going on, to give themselves confidence that it's not just mysterious magic. You're just going to have to, if you were kind of selling the system to parties in a dispute, there's not a lot you can say other than it's really clever machine learning, yada yada, magic, which maybe people won't find that persuasive. They probably would prefer their day in court in front of a judge, or of course come to a mediator and have a nice, calm, sensible negotiation with the help of a mediator. But anyway, that's my thoughts on how we might be able to use some of the learning from the community node system in X, formerly known as Twitter, to come up with some ideas about how to automate dispute resolution. If you have any thoughts on that, do let me know in the comments. Thank you.